Okay. Recording. Hello. Hello there. Hi Tanya. Are you can you hear me all right? Oh. Okay. Just getting my technical stuff. Hey Tanya, can you hear me all right? You bet. Great. Okay, I'm gonna start because I've got this a little bit memorized. So before I forget it all, I want to start talking about color printing from Lightroom or printing from Lightroom. If you're watching this video, you probably love to output your photographs as either going down to a print house, on the high street like Jessup's, or you have a desktop printer, like an Epson or a Canon or something like that, and you want to learn how to get color accurate prints. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit of history. Let me start from the very beginning, and let me just say that reproducing color is not an exact science. Okay, in fact, sometimes you think it would be voodoo magic to get the output that you want. So if you go and you've got Lightroom and you bought a new printer and you just start, it looks great on your screen, and then you do your first print and it's just miles away from the color and possibly the density that you are hoping it would be, it's because you haven't done a lot of very precise calibration to your printer and to your monitor, and you're probably not working also in the right color spaces. So there's a lot of things that need to happen to make a good print, and it's pretty technical, but once you get it down the first time, it gets easier from there. And let me just say that also, being a very experienced printer, this also happens when analog darkrooms, like when I'm working in the color. Hi Doug. Like when I'm working in the color dark room, right? We would burn a lot of paper, and it's the same with desktop digital printing. You're going to get one. Hopefully you're going to get it in the ballpark because you've got your calibrations correct, and you're going to output that first print. You're going to look at it, you're going to go, doesn't quite look like my screen. It could be off by, a little bit of magenta, a little bit of a green or something like that. And that's okay, because you can't expect to get it perfect the first time. I'll just say from experience, even as a really experienced printer like myself, I rarely get it even the second time, because there's always, I have a really sensitive eye for color, and there's always a little bit of correction you could do to make it absolutely perfect. So it may look good to you the first time you output it, hopefully after you get everything calibrated, but there's probably still some work that can be done. I remember I took my assistant to a color lab. We were doing some printing, and it was his first time. I was teaching him how to color print, and the first 5 came out, and I ripped them in half and threw them in the can, and he was like, oh my god, those were perfect. I was like, those weren't even close. And then I had to get them out of the trash, and then I made a couple corrections. He's like, I see why those weren't good enough before. I come from a really high-end commercial printing background, high volume in Los Angeles, doing a lot of fashion stuff, so got a lot of experience with printing color. And then digital came around and made everything so much more complicated. Like I say, reproducing color is not an exact science, but don't throw up your hands and live with whatever output comes out the other end. You can change the color, and getting a handle on color management requires 4 things, right? Some knowledge, some patience, a significant amount of time to experiment and test, which is really important, testing, and most importantly, acceptance. You know, you got to accept that your print is not going to look like your monitor exactly, right? Because what is a monitor? It is color phosphors. You know, it's an LCD screen. It's rear illuminated, and you know, it's being projected onto your eyeballs, the light, where a print is light that's being reflected off of the paper, right? So it has a different color space, naturally a different color space than your screen. So the best you can do when you're printing is try to get it as close as possible to how you like it to look on your screen. But you gotta accept that it's not gonna be perfect, okay? It's gonna be close. One day it might be close, the next day it might not be so close. Now, okay, let me just read some stuff to you here. So one of the basic gripes is like, but why didn't it look like that on my screen? Okay, there's two major color models. There's the RGB color model, which is red, green, blue, and the cyan, magenta, and yellow, black color model, right? So RGB's got like 16.7 million colors, and CMYK has about 55,000 colors. Now, you would only use CMYK. You'll never, you know, unless you're going to a print house and they're going to output, you know, a couple thousand books for you, you'll never have to convert your files to CMYK. But I've done it many times, and it is heart-wrenching going from, you know, working with RGB files for a long time, looking at them on the screen, even outputting them, and then converting them into CMYK, and then trying to get that CMYK to look like RGB. It is heart-wrenching when it doesn't work. You just got to accept that they are two different color gamuts or two different color spaces, and you know, they're not going to sync up perfectly color-wise. You just got to get the best you can. Why did that change? Hold on a second here. Just looking at my thing here. Okay, just trying to get. Good morning, Carol. Okay, so part of the printing process is acceptance that it's not going to look exactly like your screen. Okay, and so this 16 million colors of RGB and the 55,000 colors of CMYK is called a gamut, right? That's the range of color that these spaces are able to print, right? Now, if you go out and buy an inkjet printer, or you go down to your local print shop, they're going to be printing RGB, right? Lightroom, Photoshop are all RGB. You're going to be looking at an RGB color space, right? So 16.7 million colors. And always think, you know, RGB is a color space I'm printing in. Now, when you go and buy an Epson printer, it's going to have cyan, magenta, yellow, and blue. You know, those are the CMYK colors, but it's mixing those to make RGB, right? To make those 16.7 million colors, okay? So many of the colors that you see on your screen fall outside the CMYK gamut and therefore cannot be reproduced on paper. In some cases, CMYK colors fall outside the RGB gamut, and that's when you get clipping. You know, that red doesn't gradate like you would like it to. It just goes flat, or you know, that's the worst thing for me, is like when you have a smooth gradation of color and then you go to CMYK and it just becomes one color, because that gamut, that color space cannot handle, you know, those minute changes in red or whatever in between. Those colors would be out of gamut, right? Okay, and if that difference is not enough to complicate matters, hardware devices that share the same color model can possess different gamuts within the same color model, right? For example, the RGB color space of a monitor can differ from the RGB color space of a scanner or printer. Okay, so each device that you have in your workflow, your monitor, your scanner, if you're doing scans for film, your printer, they're all going to have different color spaces, and they're going to be kind of custom color spaces. Hi, Jacqueline. How are you? I'm into the flow of really. I'm going to try to clarify this. I'm just priming you guys to let you guys know there's a couple steps you need to take. Okay, so when you take into account the differences that can occur between platforms, monitors, printers, browsers, scanners, applications, papers too, and other substrates, there's almost an infinite number of permutations that can take place. Okay, so there's mind-numbingly large amounts of variation in printing. Okay, in other words, color is dependent upon the hardware device, and the device-dependent color varies. That's just the whole cold, harsh reality of desktop printing. Okay. But then Adobe came by and they started making device-dependent profiles, right? They started making like the Adobe RGB color space, and saying they would define this color space and say this is the colors within Adobe RGB. And anything outside of this is not going to print well. So they would give this standard. You can use this standard in your applications like Photoshop and Lightroom, and you can take that standard. Your print house is going to have that same Adobe RGB profile, and if it looks good on your color calibrated monitor, and you take it down to a print house and they're using the same color profile, then you're going to be pretty sure that they're going to be able to see the same colors as you and reproduce the colors that you want. It's going to be pretty close. So Adobe really kind of helped made printing and device dependency standardized. That being said, there are still a lot of different color spaces that you work with. Okay, is everybody still with me? Okay, so how do you make a great print? You start with these things that are called ICC files, right? And that stands for the International Color Consortium, and it's a standardized color gamut or color space, right, that you apply to your photographic files, or you apply to a printer and paper combination, right? Each device needs to be calibrated, and that your printer needs to be calibrated, and your monitor needs to be calibrated. First of all, if you want to expect any kind of predictable results, those two things must be done if you want consistent, good results. Okay, and I'll talk about that as we go along. So each device should be properly calibrated and profiled using an appropriate measuring device, such as a color meter or spectrophotometer, which is or system software, which is not very good. But if you're working with Windows or Apple, there is a way to go into the system files and calibrate your monitor. It's going to give you a brightness and a contrast test, and possibly an RGB test where you have to visually kind of like match it until these lines disappear, or when this number is just barely visible. That's the process, software process in the OS of calibrating your monitor. Now there's much more accurate ways to do it by buying some hardware that you, like a color spider, which I'll show you, which you hang on your screen and it automatically creates a calibrated monitor for you. You still have to do some things, like the RGB adjustments and the contrast and the bright. It'll tell you what to do, and then it'll show you the before and after, and that's about as good as you're going to get your monitor calibrated. And as monitors age, you have to keep doing this every 2 weeks. If you print a lot, you want to do it like every 2 weeks, every month. Okay, so what do you need to know? Number one, you need to know about monitor calibration. And number two is color spaces. That's the RGB color space, or the sRGB, which we use for the web and other things like that. Third thing you need to know is ICC profiles. ICC profiles will come with, you can make them custom, right, for your printer and paper combination. Like say you have an Epson printer and you use a very specific ink set, and you have a Mueller canvas paper. You can make an ICC profile just for that paper and that ink set with that printer, and you can name it whatever you want. I'll show you who to send, how to get that done, and these people will send you back an ICC profile which you load into Lightroom or Photoshop, and you tell your printer this is the profile. Any more technical than that, I don't know what it does, but you load it in there and it start to get good results. Okay, so the first thing you do is you calibrate your monitor. All right, since the monitor is the only window through which you view your files, it is really important, especially if you're sending your files away, for somebody else to look at. If your monitor's too dark or too red, your prints are going to come back light and green if somebody else is calibrated. You know what I mean? You guys gotta have the same standardized monitor profile if you're sending your stuff out. And if you're printing your own stuff, and if you want consistent work, if you want your prints to look like what you see on your screen, you got to get your monitor calibrated. It's not hard to do, but it takes a bit of work. Let me show you. I'm just going to switch to this is a hardware. Well, that's not it. Let me switch to where is this thing? One sec, guys. Just trying to get this to show my Chrome thing here. One sec. Yeah, have a look at this. Okay, so this is Data Color. It's a company who makes this thing called the Spider. Okay, and the Spider, you lay it on your screen. I'll just click on this one here. Yeah, so it looks like this. Hangs on your screen, and it does a test. And this is all about getting your monitor calibrated and looking its neutral best, I'll say, right? Now they make a bunch of different models, anywhere from 150 to like 500, I'm not sure. So if you wanted to go the hardware route, Data Color makes pretty much the industry standard for screen hardware. All right, so another solution is, if we are going to go through the Mac and the PC route, right, you're going to get something like you're going to go into your display settings and go into color calibration, Mac or PC, right? It's going to be display settings, color calibration. You're going to go in there, you're going to do a couple contrast tests, brightness tests, you're going to eyeball it, and that's going to get you pretty close, right? I think if you did it that way, if you didn't want to invest in hardware, calibration hardware, that's going to get you pretty close, okay? And then what you need to do after that is create a printer profile, which is not something you can do yourself. You usually would send that off to someone. I've got a guy in the UK. He sends me a color chart. I print it out to his very specific instructions. I mail it to him. He does his spectrometer test on it, and then he emails me an ICC profile, that works for that paper I used and the ink set that I've used to create the color chart. And I get that ICC profile and I slap it into Lightroom. I'll show you that in a minute. And man, it works really, really, really well. And costs you 10 or maybe 15 quid. Like, let me show you this guy here. His name is it's colorfill.co.uk, and he creates color custom printer profiles. So after you calibrate your monitor, this is what you want to do next, right? It's not very expensive, and you know, the savings that you'll gain from not burning and wasting so much paper, completely worth it. All right, so color fill, and there's also Permajet now makes custom ICC profiles. I'm not sure how much their service is, but Permajet is really good. Yeah, so you'll get this chart here. Like, let me just show you real quick. Maybe this will have. No, it's a video, but you see this little chart here. All right, this color chart. This, they'll send you this, and you print it out, and then you send it to them, and they send you an ICC profile. Okay. Are there any questions? I'm sure there are going to be questions if you're not overwhelmed by all the technicalities of this. So just go ahead and ask questions. I got the text chat box up. So now I'm going to switch over to Lightroom. Okay. And once you get all this stuff calibrated, I'm not going to get too much into color spaces and ICC profiles because it gets really, really deep. And you know, I have a printing class that I'm doing in May, and then another one in October, where I have 4 days workshop to explain this in depth. But for now, in this live Facebook presentation, I just want you to be aware about the calibration, and you'll need to know a little bit about that ICC profiles and color spaces. Okay, color space is the space you work within when you're doing your images, right? And that is the RGB space, that is the ProPhoto space, that is the sRGB space. These are all different color spaces that have different, you know, some are better with ranges of red, some are wider, some are smaller. Like the sRGB is for screen RGB, and that's what we create our JPEGs with, because we don't need 17 million colors or 16, you know, to do, hi Debbie, to create JPEGs. All right, so let's switch over to, hey Debbie, let's switch over to Lightroom now. I'm going to show you. So when you're in Lightroom, right? So we've got all our calibration and profiling done, right? Our printer is calibrated, our monitor is calibrated, and we are ready to print from Lightroom. Okay, so if we're in the develop module, let me just put that there like this. Okay, so I've got this image up. Like say this is a, what is this? This is a TIFF file, right? And you can see here that it says Adobe RGB perceptual, right? And it says that because I am in soft proofing, right? Sorry. No, actually I had that. Sorry. I had that. That's my color space, Adobe RGB, and perceptual is the way I want to print it. That has nothing to do with me being in soft proofing. Sorry about that. Oops. There we go. Okay, so say we got our color how we want it to look on the screen, right? For some reason I picked this particularly really difficult image to demonstrate. This is really hard to make this image look like it does on the screen on a print. It's just extremely complicated, this the color in this image. So I know it's going to be difficult. So so I'm working in this, I've got my color right, and then you'll notice down here in the develop module you've got this thing called soft proofing, right? And if I click soft proofing, right, it changes the background paper white, right? Let's just say we're using a pure white paper. If I was using a darker paper, I could change my brightness level there, right? But let's just say I'm using a pure white, like satin Epson glossy paper, okay? And you'll see over here you get the soft proofing dialog box, and you get your histogram, right? And in the histogram you're going to have, you've got two boxes here. You got the monitor here, right? And on the top left, and if I hover over the monitor, or I just click it down, right, I'll just hover over it. Now anything that, when I have soft proofing checked and I'm hover over this, anything that turns blue means it's out of gamut of my current combination of ICC profile, okay? So let me show you. And if I come over here to the other side, this is this hides the this is the other side. This hides the stuff that's also not going to print on the brighter side, okay? So like you see here, the blue there, like this blue is too intense, right? And if I hover over that, right, so when I print this, that blue is not going to be that intense. It's going to pick the darkest blue that my printer is capable of producing, right? And it's not going to be that brilliant, it's not going to be that bright, because this is a screen and paper is reflected light, or this is projected light, okay? If I come over here, I can see that all this blue here is colors or that are not going to reproduce accurately. So what I can do now is I can have these gamut warnings on, and I can go to my color and start making adjustments, right? Like, okay, this is my original, looks like this. Yeah, I could go down to my tone curve, and I could do some adjustments here and see what happens, right? And you're going to find when you do this kind of stuff that it doesn't always, you know, it's going to fix one thing, but it's not going to fix everything. Now, what I've done here, right, it's telling me that my black is too dark. So if I just raise up my minimum black here, right, I bring that up until, well, you can see about right there. It gets rid of some of it, right? And what is the rest of this? Is orange. Seems like this orange here, right, is not going to print, right? So I could see that there. So I might go to my, this is where it gets complicated, folks. I might go to my HSL. Let me turn this on, and I will grab my saturation, because it's probably saturation that I'm lacking here. I'm just going to drag that down a little bit. Yeah, and that did it. That did it. So let me go out again. That was actually really successful. So this is what I see on the screen. Yeah, this is the image I've been working with for a year, and I love the way it looks. But now in soft proofing, you know, I made my color corrections, and it's telling me my print is going to look like that, right? So it's a lot flatter. It's not as saturated, right? But it still looks pretty good, right? And you know, if I take off soft proofing, let me just keep it in soft proofing for a while. Like, if I don't like that black so much, you know, it's like, oh, it looks kind of washed out, and I want to get that black back. You know, I can try dragging it back this way, and then you'll see that the blue starts to come back in, right? The out of gamut warning comes back in. That's what that blue is, right? So that's going to be blacks with no detail, no color or anything, or maybe in this case some greenish hues here too. So I mean, that's what happens when I bring the black in. So you know, I could be happy if I had just a little bit out of gamut and do a print from there, but ideally I don't want to see any of the out of gamut warning in my file. and I'm going to play around with my contrast and my highlights with the gamut warning on, right? And try to get it to look as close as to this as possible. But you see it's not happening, right? This is soft proofing is a simulation of what it's going to look like on paper. Yeah. So this is the screen. Yeah. This is the before, and this is my soft proofing. This is the after. This is Lightroom saying this is probably what it's going to look like when it comes out of the printer. All things being good, okay? Now, let me just come over here to this dialog box again, the soft proofing. Now, we did the out of gamut warnings, right? That's the blue and of the highlights and the shadows, right? Also color. You'll find that if you're finding a lot of blue, usually decreasing saturation will be one of the biggest changes you can make. Yeah, even more than contrast, because I mean, if we look at the original here, it's way more saturated than the soft proof version, right? And you can tell it's a soft proof version because it says proof preview here in the top right corner. All right, now let me move on to profiles. Now, if I was printing to my printer now, right, and I had my custom ICC profile, I would not have Adobe RGB here. This is where I would put my custom profile, would show up here. So if I go other, I click other, you're going to see all these. I don't have so many on my laptop because I don't really print from my laptop, but I would have, you know, Epson. One of these would say Epson satin 310 gram paper, and I know that's the one I got from that's my ICC profile for my printer, right? And I'm going to use that one because that one is the one I'm going to be printing from. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but this is a major step in color printing, okay? You've got to have that. You don't want it to say RGB because that's your screen. You want to come down here and find your, you know, your ICC profile. See, look, this color match one. Look what this one does. Totally different, right? If I could, let's try sRGB. Yeah, let me turn that on. How about ProPhoto? ProPhoto is a really wide gamut, so that shouldn't have so much. Display P3. Let me just go back. Okay, so what you want to do when you get your custom color profile, you're going to have to find out where to put it in your system. In Windows, it's like Windows System 32, spool, drivers, color. You got to stick it in some obscure system folder so it shows up here. Apple people, I'm not sure what you do, but it's the same process of finding where to put your ICC profiles into your system folders. Now you can Google this and you would say, where do I put my ICC profiles, Windows 10? And it'll give you the path, and you just drag it, your ICC profile, and you put it in there, right? Make a copy of it and put it in there, and then it'll show up in Photoshop and Lightroom and all the other programs that use ICC profiles, okay? Okay, so you got your color right, you corrected your out of gamut stuff, you got your ICC profile input here, right, in Lightroom. This works the same way with Capture One. Also, you've got to change your input your custom profile here, or any profile you want to use. You don't want to print on Adobe RGB because that is a screen color space, okay? That is just for your screen. Same with ProPhoto and Color Match. These are all these here are screen profiles, right? You want to have your printer profile show up here. I won't say that again, but it's very important. Okay, and beneath the profile we have intent. Now for 80% of your, or 90% of all your photographic printing, you're going to be on perceptual. right? I'm not going to explain the difference between perceptual and relative because it gets kind of complicated, and that's another video, okay? But make sure you're on perceptual. What perceptual does really it keeps it more photographic light, more than an illustrative feel, right? So it'll make gradations as close to natural as possible from the original file. All right, so perceptual. Okay, so once you're ready to print, let me just going to go here to the print module. Okay, so I've got my file here. You could still see that it looks like a color proof, right? So that's good. I'm not going to go over the image settings and layout and custom packages and stuff like that because we're just talking about how to print. Okay, so I'm in the print module now in Lightroom, and we got all this stuff. Only thing I'm interested in now today is print job. Okay, and you want to be going to your printer, right? You want to set your print resolution. Depends on your printer, but if you're doing a nice 10 megabyte or 30 megabyte raw file, you want to be about 300 dpi. Yeah, that's going to be 240 to 300 dpi. You don't want to print at 72 dpi when you're going to paper, right? 72 dpi is only for the screen, so you've got your print resolution should be about 300 dpi or ppi in this case, pixels per inch. Okay, always have a little bit of print sharpening on, standard, low, whatever, but always have print sharpening checked. It's really important. Even if you've sharpened your file, you still got to output with a little bit sharpening again. Okay, and if you send your file off to a bureau to do the printing for you, be sure and know that they will also sharpen your image before they print. If you're not sure, you can ask them if they sharpen the files before print. All professional labs will sharpen image files that you give them before they go to print. So you may not want to do it if you're sending it away. Check with your lab because you don't want it to be double sharpened. Okay, and one of the under color management, right? So we've got the printer. We're not going to a JPEG file. We're going to printer, right? We've got a print resolution at 300. Yeah. We have sharpening checked. Hi, John. And then we have media type, right? So if you've got glossy paper or if you've got matte paper, you need to input that here because that's going to dictate how much ink is going to be used in creating your print, right? Glossy is going to use a little bit less than a matte paper. Well, no, is that right? Yeah. I think matte paper is going to actually use less because it spreads more. That would make sense. I'm not really sure about that, but that would make sense. The bleed is going to be less or more with matte paper, so you probably want to use less ink, I would think. Not really sure. But choose your paper type, okay, your media type. And then under that, we've got color management. Now, there's two sections here. You also have to set up something here, okay? Now, what we don't want to do, I know this is going to sound kind of contradictory, but we don't want the printer to manage our color. Even though we have an ICC file for that printer, that is being processed by the color management software in Lightroom or Photoshop. If we say manage by printer, it's going to bypass all the color stuff that we're doing in Photoshop and Lightroom, and the printer's saying, I'm taking over the color, let me add it, and it's going to mess up everything. So we don't want the printer to manage our color, right? That defeats the whole purpose of getting an ICC profile made. Hi, Yvonne. Okay, so what we do is we go down here, and again, we input our custom printer profile. Whatever it may be. I don't have one here, but I would find Anthony's Epson satin paper on this list because I put my ICC profile in the correct system folder. Okay, it would be there, and I would also choose it here, right? So I'll just say Profoto RGB and then perceptual again. Okay, and then we got this last dialog box called print adjustment. I've never used it. I've tried it. It works terribly. Paper is too expensive to experiment with the brightness and contrast from this dialog box. So I personally just never use this. Okay. So once you have all this set up, we have calibrated our monitor. We have profiled our printer. They're talking to each other because we have inputted, we have proofed it, and we have got our ICC profile in the develop module under soft proofing here. Now we've got that figured out. We got it input here. Let me just put another one in here just to let's just say that's it. Yeah. And you can see how each one changes my histogram around. Each color profile will change the histogram around, and then you make your adjustments by checking these gamut warning boxes and making sure that we're not getting blue and red there. We try to make it as clean as possible. Okay, we get that done, and then we go to print, and then we go down to print job. We go to the printer. We input our DPI at 300. We pick our paper. We add a little sharpening. And again, we pick our color profile. Our ICC profile for our printer, perceptual, and then we say print. Okay. Now I don't have a printer attached to this laptop, but I'm going to show you the dialog box that comes up when you're printing. Okay. Now it looks something like, I'm going to show you an Epson one. Let me get this on the screen here. Just all right, so I've got this on the screen here, and this is it. Okay, so you're going to click print, and the dialog box is going to come up. This is from my previous printer, right? So this is an Epson Stylus Photo R2880. This is an old printer. This is an old image, but you click print, and this should come up. Okay. Now, what we want to do here is, there's not a lot, but we do, our media type we want to be the same as what we chose in Lightroom, glossy or matte. You need to pick that here. All right, so color would be color of black and white. Your print quality is going to be, that's going to be like if you want to do 1440 dots per inch, you'll have, depends on your printer, so I can't tell you which one is correct, but it's probably going to be about 1440 if you're doing photographic quality. If you got a really good printer and you're doing A3, it could be much larger than that, but good quality is about 1440 DPI. Okay, the most important thing here in this dialog box is the mode, right? You want off, no color adjustment, because if you say manage by printer here, it bypasses all the color engines that Adobe is trying to use to make a beautiful print, and the printer takes over and it has no idea what it's doing. So you want to make sure you have this off and no color adjustments in the print dialog. Okay, and then you select your feeder and your paper size, and you hit OK, and it will start printing. And hopefully that is going to be excuse me, that is going to output a print that you're going to be pretty happy with. you know, your leaves are gonna be green, your sky's gonna be cyan. You know, it's gonna be pretty close. That's what we're hoping to get our first time, is something that's looks good. We say, hey, that's not bad. You know, that is a good result. If you can look at it and you go, that's not bad, I kind of like that, I'm going to go show my friends. Don't yet, because you need to get that print, and you need to take it into some good light. Yeah, not under a lamp in your room, not under the the fluorescence in the bathroom or whatever. Outside under some sunlight. That might be a little bit too bright, but maybe some open shade somewhere. The light you look at the print under is going to affect the color. It's also going to affect the density and how that print is viewed, right? So, I mean, it's getting a bit dark in here. I would not print, I wouldn't print in this light and then assess my print in this light. It's dark in here. I would have some kind of standardized light. Like if you go into the lab, the bureau who does the prints for you, they'll have a light box. You put the print under the viewer, and it's like a daylight balance bulb, and it's so many lumens, and it's very consistent. I forgot what they call that. It's a daylight box, right? And then you're always going to view your prints under the same light. Don't look at it in the bathroom and then look at it in the bedroom and then come back and make color adjustments and expect to get consistent results. You always got to look at your prints under the same light each time, and you want that light to be pretty standard, not I don't want to say direct sunlight, but it needs to be neutral, like 5500 Kelvin kind of light, and fairly bright. Not so bright that you're gonna go back to your file and say, oh, this is too bright, and make your files darker, and the next one will come out darker, right? Tanya says, my Epson printer only has 4 colors. Do I need more? No. It's going to have cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And with that combination of ink cartridges, you can get the 16 million RGB colors. That's it. I mean, what they have now is like you'll get printers with 8 cartridges, 10 cartridges, so it'll have 3 shades of cyan and dark black, medium black, and light black, and that's for like some really, really fine printing. I mean, they're totally worth it. I mean, a 4 cartridge RGB printer is going to give you some pretty good standard photos. You're going to be happy with them. But if you're doing portfolio stuff, or you're doing something, if you're really into your printing, you're probably going to want more than 4 cartridges. Yeah, and it just allows finer gradations of color, right? Finer gradations of color. And printers are really pretty inexpensive. I mean, if you wanted to get, you can get an Epson Expression for under 200 pounds now. I can't decide which printer I'm buying, the Canon or the Epson. I'm not sure. I might go with Canon this time because my last 2 printers have been Epsons, and the Canon's getting really rave reviews. But I gotta wait till I go back to London so I can actually see some of the stuff that's coming out of these things down at the Park Cameras or Wix Photographic. Talk to some professionals before I get my next printer. So, what else do we need to know? I'm going to post this file. I've got a file here, like a little handout, talks about what I covered here in this hour of talking about color printing, almost an hour. It's not easy to remember all this stuff, and excuse me. And it will take some trial and error. Remember, you've got to accept that what you see on your screen, you're not going to get off your printer. Yeah. You want to get pretty close, but don't expect them to ever match. There's 2 different mediums, and they were never meant to look the same. One is a phosphor screen, and the other is a piece of paper that reflects light into your eyeballs. They work differently. The colors gamuts are different, and they're never going to match up. So our job is to get it to look as close as possible, yeah, to accept a color range on a print that we're happy with, yeah, that looks pretty much like we want it to look on the screen, or how it looks on the screen, right? But don't expect it to be screen-like. Not going to happen. Excuse me. Tanya asks, what about paper types for portraiture? Now, I don't want to really get into paper types. Some people, I mean, if you're doing fashion kind of stuff, then you might want to go with a glossy paper. I think it's a bit too much contrast for faces. Glossy papers tend to have a little bit more contrast than a satin and matte papers. Matte papers are lower contrast just by their very nature, where a glossy paper will have, because of its gloss, its reflectance values, it'll have more apparent contrast. So if you want to use that for portraiture, it's a bit slick for my taste, but I usually go with a satin or a pearl finish, yeah. And my goodness, one of the cool things about desktop printing is the different types of substrate that you can print on. You know, we've got rag, we've got canvas, we've got ultra gloss, every type of matte paper you can think of. And most of the manufacturers now will, if you go to their websites, they will have ICC profiles for each one of their products. Like Permajet will have they'll have a profile for their matte papers and a profile for their glossy papers, and you can use those, you know, and you can use those, you know, go back to Lightroom and you could put those in your system folder and change it here, right? So we would change that in this box here. We would find it in there here and input it there. So that would be just a paper profile, okay? Let me just clarify one thing here, because let me just say also, like, there's back in the develop module, right? If you have an ICC profile for your paper, you can put it here, right? I may have not been really clear on this. Let me just say that you would find your my Epson my Epson satin custom ICC file. I'd find that and I'd bring it up and I'd put it in this profile here, right? But when I go to print, right, under color management, I'm going to want to find my printer profile, and that's going to be you know, my Canon R2880 profile is going to be there. So you might be using two different profiles. One in develop is going to be your paper profile, right? We put our paper profile here, and then we go to print, we put our printer profile. Yeah, that's really important. I hope I didn't confuse the issue. I don't think I said that properly the first time, right? So let me say it one more time. In the develop module, we put our paper profile here, yeah, and then we go to print. Under color management, we put our printer profile here, okay? All right. Yeah, so let me just I want to say one more thing. Let me just recap real quick here. 4 things you want to know. It's monitor. The first thing you got to do is calibrate your monitor. Yeah. You want to know what color space you're working in, right? And you got to know that a Pro Photo color space is going to be larger than an RGB color space. Don't want to get too much into that right now. because it can get really complicated, right? So let's just not talk about color spaces. You're mostly going to be working in an RGB color space, right? 99% of the time, you don't need to go out of that, all right? You're probably never going to work in a CMYK color space. So monitor calibration, the correct ICC profiles for the paper and the printer, right? And then making sure that Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One are all using the same color engine by telling it to use these very specific profiles that you have custom input into them, because if you let your printer manage it, it's not going to work. Now, I got a handout here I'm going to post under this video. Hopefully that'll have a lot of clarification. Not clarification, but you can refer to that because it has everything that I've talked about here and a little bit more. Okay, and yes, that is me on the tractor. You'll know when you find the file. Okay, and remember, when you go to Lightroom, right, before you print, when you want to simulate, you're in the develop module, you want to simulate what your paper is going to look like, you've got to click hi Serena, got to click soft proofing, right, down here in the toolbar. Make sure your toolbar is showing, and then click soft proofing, and then your paper white or whatever it's going to be, depends on your paper, and then you make your adjustments with your gamut warnings, right? Let me just reset this, show you again, right? You want to make sure that you want to get rid of all that stuff that's out of gamut. Yeah, and we usually do that by saturation and density, right? So like this image here, let me just do this again. I'm going to try that with saturation again. So I would just click my tool here and go over my color here and try to take out as much of that blue as I can. It's actually green, right? And then it didn't get it all out, so I'm going to go over to my blacks and try that. Of course, it doesn't work as well as it did the first time. Yeah, so you can see yeah, all the stuff that's happening, right? And I did it better the first time. I'm not sure I could go, oh, I know what I did. Yeah, I went to the tone curve and I brought up the maximum black a little bit, and then maybe bring down the highlight. Yeah, it's just compressing the gamut there, right? So once I get rid of all that, I'll go back down to my saturation and maybe bring that green back up and see what happens. Maybe even add some more orange now, until I'm seeing the red. And I'm trying to, if I do the before and after now, I'm just trying to get it to look like my original, right? So soft proofing is a simulation of what Lightroom thinks it's going to look like on the paper, and it should be pretty close if you've got your ICC profiles in place and you got your monitor calibrated. All right, any last questions? I know that's a lot to take in, guys. That's why I have I'm really into printing. Before the digital printing, I did many years of analog printing, decades actually, and I really love printing. I think it's the penultimate thing you could do in photography is to print your work, put it on the wall, and it's I enjoy it as much as I do taking the photos. It's like the final piece of art, penultimate step in creating a piece of art, and the ultimate would be hanging it on the wall in a frame. Okay, so before I run out of daylight here, I'm going to end. I just want to ask if there's any last questions before I sign off. Okay. I'll just end by saying, printing is um, got some comments there. Wow, a ton of info, but since I have never printed, I am looking forward to learning this and doing it for myself. Thanks so much. You're most welcome, Tanya. I hope everybody found it useful. I'll put some resource links also in the comments, so you have something to refer to about printing, because it can be quite involved, and or just remember that your first print is not going to be your best, and printing is a trial and error process, right? Don't get discouraged if the prints are not working the first time or the second time. You can burn a lot of paper and a lot of ink getting that beautiful gallery quality print, okay? You just got to accept that it's going to take a bit of trial and error. And May and October of next year, I'm doing a print workshop that's 4 days long. 4 days long, and I'm going to make a bunch of professional printers out of people who join it. But it's a 4-day workshop, not an afternoon, because there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot you got to get your head around. But I think I've given you a pretty good start and how to print from a desktop from Lightroom. Okay? Yeah, vertical learning curve. You guys will get it. You guys will get it. Like you say, if you've got questions, you can just put them in the comments and I'll answer. I'm back in action now after being away for a while, but I'm back. Okay? Thanks for joining me, everybody, on the printing workshop or how to print from Lightroom. Hope you enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And I will post some files and some links into the comments, okay, of this post. All right, bye-bye. Let me give myself a heart here. See you later, everybody.